Hi, I'm Andrew Berry and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. We're going to be looking at soldering in this short film. We're going to be showing you the best way, in my opinion, to solder a piece of silver on top of a piece of sheet. Now, the books and videos will show you a particular method. That method I'm going to show you the problem that I see with that particular method. And then I'll show you my way that I think is the best way possible that will save you so much time and energy and have the minimal amount of cleanup. So first of all, I'm going to basically just solder. I got a little bit of silver sheet and I got a little bit of silver wire. We're going to solder that silver wire on top of the piece of sheet. Now, this can apply to anything. This can apply to soldering an embellishment on top of a ring. This can apply to soldering a wire onto a piece of sheet. It can be a ring. It can be anything at all. If you're soldering something, one thing on top of another, there is a better way. I'm not saying it's a correct way, that there's a better way to solder that will give you the best possible result. And if you can get the best possible result with the most minimal amount of cleaning up, that to me is the best technique to use. I got two pieces of silver, identical pieces of silver, identical small little pieces that we're going to solder on top. I'm going to show you one particular way first of all and show you the reason why I don't like doing it this way. So we got a piece of silver. I've just taken the blue protective paper off it. It looks clean, but again, as you know, you need to clean it because that bit of silver is not clean. You have to heat it up first of all and quench it in some acid or some safety pickle to remove any oxides or anything off the surface like glue or some sticky or some fingerprints, some grease, anything like that. Or you can get a little bit of emery paper just to go over that surface, just to make sure that it is really clean. Not just visually clean, but extremely clean. Let's just warm up this little bit of silver. And we're just going to quench that, get a bit of colour on it. Then we're just going to quench that now in some safety pickle. That now has made that surface really, really beautiful and clean. Looks clean, and that is really, really clean. You can either do it that way, or as I just said, get a bit of emery paper to go over it just to remove any oxides. The piece of silver that you're going to be soldering on, again, has to be really, really clean. The face, where it's going to be touching the surface, has to be really, really clean. Again, you can use the same technique, or you can get a buff stick and just rub that face over that bit of face like that, so that really now is lovely and clean. Don't touch it with your fingers because you are going to get some grease on it from your fingerprints, and we really want to make sure that these surfaces are absolutely perfectly clean. We're going to apply some flux. As you can see now, when the flux goes onto that plate, you can see how the surface is absolutely clean because the flux covers the entire surface. We're going to just coat that little bit of silver as well. Lovely, and you can have plenty of flux, doesn't matter what flux you use, and you put that bit of silver on top like that. Now we're going to solder that little bit of silver on top of that little sheet. We're going to get some solder. Now it doesn't matter what type of solder you're going to use, whether it be easy, medium or hard in this particular demonstration. I got a little bit of solder here, and I'm going to cut some small little pallions for this. I'm just going to pop them on my block, and I'm going to cut perhaps 3 little pallions for the one side, like that. And I'm also going to show you another quick little technique that is often shown. I'm going to cut a couple more pieces, just pop them over to this side here. Now, the problem that I've got with this technique is as soon as the solder starts to melt, it will melt onto the surface. Now, as soon as the solder melts onto that surface, even though it's drawn underneath those two pieces, there will be a little pool left on that sheet where that solder has melted. Now, let me just quickly ball up 3 little pieces of solder first of all. That's quite a good technique to have because the most minimal amount of contact with the surface, the better. So let's just warm up these little bits of solder first of all. Let's just bring them into a little ball, warm them up. And really, I don't like using this technique because when you heat up the solder, you sort of lose some of the properties when you heat it up again. So I've got 3 pieces of solder. I've got 1 for there. In fact, I'm only going to use 2. 2 for that side there. And I've got 2 little pieces of balled up solder, and I'm going to use those little balled up pieces of solder there as well. So I've got some pallions here straight from the solder strip and 2 little balls there. Now, when the solder melts, the solder will not flow directly underneath between those 2 surfaces straight away. It will melt, and most probably it will melt upon the sheet. When it does that, you have to get that solder off, and this is my argument. This is why I don't like using this particular technique. Let's warm this up and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to warm this up really, really gently. Let's make sure those little bits of solder there stay in place. So the solder is right next to where we want it to flow. We want it to flow underneath this piece of silver here. Warm this up. The solder will start to melt. There we go. And this by here as well. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, brilliant. Perfect job. Make sure the solder has come to, make sure the solder has come through to the other side. Yes, it has. Okay, now have a good look at this now. You can see roughly where that solder has melted onto the plate by here. You can see some slight marks where the solder has melted. By here, a lot better because the solder was in a ball. There was less contact area with the plate. So we have less to clean up here. Now, if this was a technique I had to use, I would make sure that solder is rolled up into balls. First of all, you have less contact with the plate, less cleanup to do. But you have cleaning up to do because the solder has melted onto the plate first, then it's gone underneath those 2 pieces to be soldered. That's where it's been drawn in by the heat and the flux to solder. So that is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly good solder joint, a very good solder joint, but you've got cleaning up to do on this flat plate. Now, let me show you a technique, put that to one side there, that I like to use that will give you literally no cleanup whatsoever. It may take a couple of seconds longer, but if you ask me, it's going to make life a lot easier. So we're going to do exactly the same thing again. We're going to warm up this little bit of silver first of all, quench it in the acid on the safety pickle, make sure there's no oxides or any grease or any sticky on it, like that there. Take it off into the acid, like that. Okay, perfect. Now then, we're going to get that little bit of silver that we had. We're going to put that on the buff stick, do exactly the same thing, rub that up and down. And now what we're going to do, we're going to put the solder on this little piece of metal. So we're going to put the solder on the smallest bit of metal that's going to go onto our plate. And we're going to put a little bit of flux onto that plate as well, making sure that is nicely covered. Just like that. Here's our strip. We're going to melt the solder onto that little strip first of all. Move that plate out of the way a moment. So here's our strip. Let's put our solder onto that. And we're going to melt the solder onto this little piece of metal first of all. Any second now, there we go. The solder melted on the whole piece. Absolutely perfect, gorgeous. The piece was clean, the piece was fluxed, the solder flowed across the whole surface. Pop that and quench that into the acid. If you found you put too much solder onto that, you can always file a little bit off, or as we did before, get our buff stick and just rub that up and down to remove some excess solder if you put too much on, that is. Again, don't touch the surface. We're going to put some flux onto that. Now this is the surface that we have just soldered. Put some flux onto that. Put that on top of our silver plate, like that there. Now we don't have to add any solder to this anymore. We don't have to put a pallium by the side or a little balled up piece of solder. We don't have to do any of that. We are simply now going to warm the piece up. And because there's solder onto that little piece already, when that melts, it's going to melt down onto the plate. Now that solder will not flow out onto the plate. It will stay. It's attracted. It wants to hold itself between those two surfaces. It will not flow outwards. It wants to stay underneath. It wants to stay tight between those two joints. It works by capillary action. The water will not flow and the flux will not flow if it can actually stay between two surfaces that are in contact with each other. So let's warm this up and I'll show you exactly what I mean now. Again, the flux bubbles up, the water evaporates, settles back down. We might just put the pieces on top just to make sure the two pieces are in contact. Warm it up and let's wait now for that solder to melt. And as soon as the temperature of the plate and that piece gets the right temperature, the solder will flow between the two surfaces. Bingo, just like that. The solder has flowed all the way around. It has flowed all the way around the other side. We've got a little bit of flux going around. Perfect. Okay, so you can see the advantage with this technique. The solder does not melt onto that plate and then underneath. So you don't have to clean the solder up. So here are my two pieces. Although at first glance they may look very, very similar, but this piece here, there is no solder on this flat plate at all. The solder has stayed underneath this applied piece and the base. There may be a nice little slight fillet on the edge. That's exactly what we're after. The solder has not flowed onto this plate. My first attempt here, the solder flowed onto the plate first, it then went underneath. So you've got a slight shadow where that solder melted. That means you're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to get your buff stick. You're going to have to buff the lovely flat surface that you've got. That means you're going to be altering the slight surface of it. It may be slightly higher, lower. There may be a slight ridge. You've got to file it. You've got to buff it with your buff stick. You've got to repolish it. And all that takes time and effort. By doing it this particular way, the second way that I've just shown you, you do not have to do any of that. You have saved yourself so much time, so much effort, which enables you then to get a much better finish on your jewelry much, much quicker. Very simple technique. I hope that has shown you exactly what I mean by sweat soldering it, that small little piece, as opposed to adding palliums onto a lovely, perfectly clean surface that you've got to clean up and polish afterwards. Thank you for watching. My name's Andrew Berry for At The Bench's YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. If you know somebody who would benefit from this type of technique, please share this with your friends, share it with your Facebook groups. I'd really, really appreciate it. And don't forget, if you haven't clicked the little bell icon, please do so. You'll be notified straight away as soon as films go live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. See you on the next film. Bye-bye.